Well, welcome everyone. It is Groundhog Day and it's been quite a week in our community. We welcome you. We welcome the strength of community and faith and caring. And as we begin, I'd like to begin with a word of prayer. Gracious and loving Creator, we thank you for the beauty of diversity, different cultures, backgrounds, and perspectives that enrich our understanding and deepen our compassion. We come before you also with hearts full of gratitude for the gift of education, the light that guides us, the wisdom that shapes us, and the knowledge that empowers us, so that our learning and curiosity foster peace in our understanding to build bridges where there are walls. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, it's with great pleasure and humility and honor that we welcome Dr. Percy Pierre, who's currently the Glen L. Martin Professor at the University of Maryland School of Engineering, a trailblazer in engineering. He was the first African-American to earn a doctorate in electrical engineering from Johns Hopkins in 1967. His impressive career includes several pivotal roles: Dean of the College of Engineering, Architecture, and Computer Sciences at Howard University, President of Prairie View A&M, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Research, Development, and Acquisition, and Vice President of the National Academy of Engineering's National Minority Engineering effort, along with a parallel initiative at the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Throughout his career, Dr. Pierre has dedicated himself to creating opportunities for underrepresented minority groups, working tirelessly to open doors for others to follow. This is a time for us to share our concerns, but first, as a trailblazer, a beacon of light, we welcome you, Dr. Pierre, and I know you have a few, some background to share, some comments to share with us as you begin. I do want to just say that there's a little technical glitch in the camera for Dr. Pierre, and we'll be able to see him for part of the presentation, and then he will turn his camera around so he can see us. So just bear with us. He'll be starting the presentation so that we can see him. And if you can't see him, he's still with us very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got myself on my phone so I can see me now. Okay. I thought
I don't want to interrupt, but if you could mute yourself on your phone, there's an echo.
It may be the volume that he's hearing himself through this camera though too. So he has to take down, he's got to turn off his sound.
I know.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
that's what I'm saying. If you could turn off the muting your phone sound.
you can hear my phone.
Not now.
Not now.
Yeah, let me turn.
No, we're okay.
No, you're okay.
Let's go. Yes, we're good. Thank you.
No, I'll just turn it off.
No, don't turn it off. Turn it off. We can't. Don't turn it off. No,
Just keep going.
No, it's fine now.
It's fine now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. Some comments that I don't know if this is working. Is it okay with you? It's okay with me. I hear an echo here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're hearing you fine, and
You're hearing me fine.
Yes.
Okay. Quickly, I'd like to give you a little background on myself. I have been in my career for a long time, and reading my resume perhaps doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'd like to put a little context around that. And I'm going to start with my high school. I grew up in New Orleans. I went to high school at St. Augustine's High School, the Catholic school here in New Orleans. It's run by Catholic priests who have a mission to African Americans. And they built this high school with two ideas in mind. One, to train African American students to compete at the highest levels and to demonstrate through their achievements that the racism that we had and still have makes no sense. So I was drilled to compete at the highest level. And there was one priest in particular, Father Grant, who symbolized that. He taught me a course in civics, and we went through all the issues of government and laws and segregation. And he was preparing us to go forth and fight the discrimination. We're talking about 1953. So that was one of the impressions made on me at that time. The second impression was Father Grant also taught chemistry, and I love chemistry. He taught physics, and I love physics more. And so when I graduated, rather than being a physicist, I became an engineer because I wanted to build things. So I left high school with two visions. One, to excel in my field, and two, to use my field when I could to make a difference in the lives of African Americans. Now, over my career, I've considered myself an engineer first and an educator second. I am an educator, but my engineering career included work with the Rand Corporation. Perhaps some of you know about that engineering think tank out in Los Angeles. I also was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Army for Research and Development in the Carter administration. And that was, frankly, my most exciting engineering job I ever had. And by the way, one of the projects we worked on in my tenure from 77 to 81 was the Black Hawk helicopter that was recently in the news in the collision with the airline going into National Airport. The Black Hawk is a very, very good helicopter, and I'm proud of the work we did with it. Sorry to hear about the accident. And the other engineering work I did after leaving the Pentagon in 81, I've worked with many defense R&D organizations, including Aerospace Corporation and many others. So as you look at my resume, that's sort of my engineering career. My education career has lots of elements. Some of the most important ones to me were when I left the Rand Corporation and went to Howard University. The whole idea was to emphasize the mission of making a difference in the lives of Black people. So that was consistent with what I was taught at St. Augustine's High School, that I needed to do both the engineering at Brand, but also make a difference in the lives of Black people. Later on, I took the job as president of Prairie View A&M University in Texas. And again, that was a transition from the job as Assistant Secretary of the Army for R&D, and to go back to the other focus of my career is making a difference in the lives of Black people. My next education position was at Michigan State University, where I was the vice president for research and graduate studies, and enjoyed that tremendously. And right now I have a part-time position at the University of Maryland, working with the Dean of Engineering on some diversity programs. So as you review all the items in my resume, if you think of those two areas, one, engineering, and the other, education, the resume might make more sense.
No, it's still quite impressive, and it has different aspects, obviously, as you pioneered in many of these positions. You were the first African American in a number of these positions. What type of barriers did you feel there were barriers, or was your education sufficient that the excellence and competence just there was did you encounter, what kind of barriers did you encounter or did you not encounter? And obviously you also decided that it wasn't just the engineering that you loved, but that you also had an obligation and a responsibility in a way to bring others along with you.
Yeah. The question is what kinds of barriers I had. There were barriers and there were opportunities, and there were people who really helped me, and people who didn't. For example, when I graduated from the University of Notre Dame with my bachelor's degree, I had a pretty good grade point average, and I decided to look for a job, and I interviewed companies. I went on a site visit, and I got no offers. So if you want to know a barrier, I had a degree in engineering with a pretty good GPA and no job. That's and that occurred in 1961. So I know I faced barriers. There were barriers that I was not aware of. But the mentality we developed at St. Augustine's was that you're supposed to attack the barriers and work with them. I recall in high school, I met a man at the library who told me that don't worry about prejudice. In 10 years, it's all going to go away. And I said, why is that? Well, he said there'll be intermarriage and whites are going to marry blacks and we won't be able to tell the difference. So that's been 50 years, 60 years. And that hasn't happened. So racism has been here forever. And it's not a question of whether there are barriers. The question is how intense are those barriers and what you do with them. So that's sort of my attitude.
So, however, you were tenacious. You did continue. what was, after not receiving any job offers, did you go on to graduate school right away, or what gave you the courage to keep going?
Well, when I graduated in my senior year at Notre Dame, the jobs didn't turn up, so I applied for graduate school at Notre Dame, and I was admitted to the master's program at Notre Dame. So I spent a year and a half there getting my master's degree. And then when I finished that, I had the feeling that I had not reached my full potential, and was considering going on for the doctorate. I had misgivings about whether I was prepared or ready for it or capable of doing it, but there was a professor at Notre Dame who told me told me I should apply for the PhD, and he told me to go and do it. So I went and did it, and I applied for a PhD at many different places. I was admitted at many different places and decided to go to Johns Hopkins. So for many years, I was no longer looking for a job. I was in school. So.
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah,
Don has a question for you.
I'd like to ask you to elaborate on one of the things you and I talked about when we first met over dinner, and that is the concept of the importance of the pipeline as a means of preparing African-American students to do the kinds of things you did. And we, as we try to think as members of the church and those of us that are interested, especially in racial justice, about what our role might be, it seems to me that the pipeline, the importance of the pipeline, there might be some places along that pipeline where we could be helpful. So if you could just talk a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, this idea of the pipeline goes way back, and to give you some context, I'd like to tell you about what was called the minority engineering effort that got started back in the early 70s. And that effort was guided by the concept of the pipeline. But let me give you a little background. Richard Nixon, a lot of people don't know, he had a very strong affirmative action program. He had something called the Philadelphia Plan. And the Philadelphia Plan said that companies that did not hire Blacks would lose their government contracts. And there was a federal construction contract in Philadelphia where this was tried out. Well, that policy caused consternation in many companies that had government contracts. And some of them got together to see what they needed to do. And those companies that hired engineers were particularly concerned because they said there were no Black engineers. And they were right, there were very few Black engineers. We're talking about 1971, 72. So as an alternative, they proposed to the government that they would help create more Black engineers as opposed to hiring a lot of Black engineers because they just weren't there. So GE was the company that led the other companies in approaching the government saying, here's a proposition we'd like to make. And they did a strategic analysis of the problem. And they decided that a critical element of the solution was financial support to undergraduate engineering students. And they invited me and several other deans of engineering. I was dean of engineering at Howard at the time, to Crotonville and told us about their plan. The plan was to provide financial support to existing students, minority students in college. I rose and said, I appreciate what you're doing, but my problem is I don't have the existing students. If you gave me a lot of money for my existing students, it's not going to make a difference. I need students. I need students coming from K through 12. Make a long story short, they agreed, and they started what they called the minority engineering effort. And that's where the pipeline concept came from. Pipeline meant that the students are moving from K through 12, through college, through graduate school, and it's the output that matters. And there are barriers along the way. There are barriers at high school, pre-college, college, and to optimize the throughput of the system, you have to attack the most important barriers. So you have to understand where the most difficult barriers are. So a program was launched, and I was asked to facilitate it, and I worked with GE. We asked the National Academy of Engineering to be the public face of this effort. And then the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation joined in, and they asked me to run their part of the program. So I was in the middle of the National Academy of Engineering, GE, and the Sloan Foundation. And the challenge was to place the limited funds at strategic points along the pipeline. Now, I had been exposed to a concept like that at the Rand Corporation. It was called systems engineering. Systems engineering is about analyzing the system, not just the parts, but the system, and applying solutions that optimize throughput. Now, it turns out that over the next 2 years, there was a spectacular increase in the number of minority engineers. So, this pipeline concept I've believed in and I've used. That does not mean that one should not have very targeted programs. What we did was we had many targeted programs. We had programs aimed at the K through 12, we had programs aimed at the college level, programs aimed at graduate school. And, these programs created a system that tended to optimize the throughput of students. So, for example, if you wanted to start a program, obviously you can't take on the whole system, but you can look at the whole system and ask yourself, where would an intervention by us be most effective? And then do it. So now that's a fairly long answer to your question, but I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. So I'm curious about where and I'll say something a little later about our public school system right now, but where you ended up targeting in the public schools, how much money was there? How did it target? Because apparently you were very successful for quite a few years, and now in the last 15 years or so, we see a drop or a plateauing of African-American or minority students in engineering. So how did you work with the K through 12 area, and how much money was dedicated?
I'm sorry, how did we pick programs?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. K through 12. We asked universities to come together and run K through 12 programs that would have consistent programming, and the students in them would have opportunities to learn about different universities. And we started a program called MESA in California. It was a program at one high school, Oakland Tech. And it really was a model program for minority students in engineering. And we expanded that throughout the Berkeley area, and then it expanded throughout California, supported by the state. The state brought in the money. The Sloan Foundation provided seed money, and the whole idea was we would only spend money if we saw somebody else taking up the program, because we didn't want to spend money and the money's gone and the program's gone. So we designed programs in K through 12. There were some in the Midwest with the Big Ten universities. And the universities had to promise to continue the programs after the Sloan money was gone. And that happened on the East Coast. In the Southeast, there's a program called SECME, Southeast Consortium Engineering Education. So the idea was to seed programs, and then our industry partners followed up with support. Sloan provided initial money, but the industry partners continued these programs, and they still continue. And some of them are supported by state government. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Are those programs, did they stop? I mean,
No, they still exist.
They still exist.
Because they were designed to still exist.
Yeah.
They were not designed as 5-year programs and that's it. They were designed. We only funded things where we saw the possibility of continued funding, either from the universities or from industry.
Do you have? I know that such programs do exist in our area. I'll go in a little bit about the history of our public school system in a little while. But do you have any explanation for why the entry into engineering has plateaued?
Okay, I'm having a little difficulty hearing you. Your question, the last question?
Do you have an explanation for why apparently over the last 15 years or so, there has not been an increase of minorities? Do you have any explanation for why that has happened?
I don't know. A lot of things have happened in the last 15 years. It's not, I don't think it's because the funding dried up. I just don't know. it would take some analysis to figure out why that happened. And to figure out how you can change it. You know, the programs we started were, 40, 50 years ago. We may need to look at different approaches. What motivates young people in K through 12, college level, what are they thinking? So you do a different analysis today and figure out how to do it. For example, maybe community colleges might play a bigger part. I think we would just have to analyze the situation today and not assume that, what worked 30 years ago is going to continue to work.
Well, I know as far as our local school system is concerned, for 11 years, 1999 through 2010-11, we had an effort to systemically provide education, particularly focusing on pre-K and up through the third grade level, to really look at how reading and math were taught by training teachers, by providing more curriculum. It was not a perfect effort, but I mean, Harvard used us as their case study for education until recently. However, what happened was we had a strong leader and the superintendent, not flawless, but very strong, and really addressing all of the schools in our area in spite of poverty. We also had a strong effort to make curriculum align with teaching efforts. And we also had money. We had people who were training. That all pretty much started drying up until we currently have a tremendous budget shortfall. And during the period after 2011, was involved in a national effort to systemically train leaders and school systems through states that was very well crafted based on international benchmarking, and the positive aspects of those efforts was adopted by the state of Maryland and passed in the Blueprint for the Future. That blueprint was beginning to be implemented last year. It involved increasing pre-K education, teacher training, having actual career ladders so people would enter the teaching force. But we now in the state of Maryland have something like a $30 billion shortfall. So as long as public education is funded through the states and the states have to balance their budget, there's a real problem in funding educational efforts, no matter how strong they might be in addressing the skills and the quality of teaching. And by the way, Montgomery County increased the reading level. They closed the gap between minorities by 2011, the gap was closed, but that is now all deteriorated. The testing is not the same. The pandemic has had a tremendous effect on, and the national report card was just published this last week that showed tremendous deficits and in education levels and achievement and the basics skills, as well as more sophisticated reading and writing. So anyway, we may need the funding and those efforts now more than ever. I mean, I think your strategic approach seemed to be very successful. And so anyway, as far as going forward, that's just a comment that I would make, but I would also like to open this to, Don, do you have any more remarks before we open this up to the audience for more questioning
Well, let me just
and responses?
drill down a little bit in one respect, Dr. Pierre. You mentioned several different existing organizations that address the pipeline issue, and one is the Southeastern Consortium of Minorities in Engineering. Are some of those organizations that you originally worked to establish still functioning, and would that be any of those be a place where the efforts of a church or a denomination might be able to cooperate and be useful?
That organization is still operating, and there are other organizations. There might be. I don't think SECME operates in Maryland, but if you would like, I could find out some of the programs, K through 12 programs that are operating in Maryland. Excuse me.
Thank you.
The College of Engineering.
Given that we do have a congregation of scientists and some engineers and math teachers, I'm looking at one right now. Yeah, I think that could be helpful, because it sounds as if, I'm not saying that Montgomery County doesn't have some of these programs. They do have some summer camps in engineering. They do make efforts, but apparently the strength of those programs has diminished. And so any way that perhaps we could make this known for members of our congregation and neighboring congregations would be helpful.
Yeah. The University of Maryland has outreach programs, and the College of Engineering in particular. They have K through 12 programs. If you looked at what's going on in that area, and not just engineering, I suspect other colleges have K through 12 programs to see exactly what's going on. There was a MESA program in Baltimore. I don't know if it's still operating. MESA was the program in California I mentioned.
Good, great. Well, I'd like to open this now to questioning, and I would, those who are with us remotely, if you would unmute yourself if you have a question. And there has been a slight echo. We recognize that. There's been a little problem with the camera that Dr. Pierre is using on his machine, but if it doesn't, I mean, I think that the sound has been adequate. Yeah. So if you could bear with us as far as the echo is concerned, and we could stick with what we have. But we do welcome other questions from the audience here or those in the chat. So let me just see if we have. Yeah, I know Louise has noted that the cost of higher education has skyrocketed. So maybe access to higher education could be addressed in some way. Dr. Pierre, do you think that could be possible?
Well, yeah, it's possible. A lot of things are possible. And I've been thinking about the issue of mentoring. Your church congregation has people who are very accomplished and well connected. Mentoring always helps. I mean, it's a good thing to do. In my career, I've mentored many people. If you inventoried the expertise and the connections of your membership. And maybe there could be an organized mentoring program for high school students. It's a lot of one-on-one work. But that's one idea.
And I'm thinking about internships. My own daughters benefited. In fact, their careers were set through internships, both during the school year and in the summer. And as my doctor daughter said, she said, "Mom, I don't think that I would be eligible, but those students that need those experiences, really need those experiences because of the barriers, should be and could be." So I think looking at on-the-job type mentorship, internship programs is something that we could pursue in our own congregation.
Yeah, mentoring has two main components. One is providing advice, and the other is providing assistance, connections. I have a lot of students I have mentored, and I still provide both advice and sometimes connections. And that's,
Yeah. And that's a possibility that others, in our group could do. Their comments.
Well,
Yeah, Bob?
Doctor, we all know that we see in different fields the ways that having a more diverse group of people can lead to problem solving in a more effective way. We don't understand how a plane might fall from the sky as a result of our quest to build a more just and equitable society. But to me, engineering is magic. I don't understand anything about it. And so I would love to hear from you, your perspective on how having a more diverse pool of engineers helps lead to better solutions in that area.
Did you hear the question?
was that addressed to me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I didn't hear the question.
Okay,
All right, I'll condense it.
yeah, and raise the volume, Bob. Yeah.
Doctor, I'm wondering if you could share with us some examples from your career of how you have seen better engineering solutions result from a more diverse pool of engineers at the table.
I understand the question. There's a more in-depth response to that in an issue of the journal The Bridge out of the National Academy of Engineering. There's an article about how women, when hired by IBM, made a tremendous difference in the quality of their products. And there are other examples like that. The idea is that engineering is a team exercise. It's not an individual exercise. It's not how many individuals can produce individual work. It's how you bring a team together to solve a problem. And teams have to be diverse. Whether it's a, baseball team or football team, it's not just the people who run the fastest. You put things together. I think industry understands that. I think athletics, they understand that. But sometimes in academics, we neglect the value of team. So if your question is, what is the value of diversity? There are many papers that have demonstrated that clearly, that diverse teams do a much better job of developing, useful products than teams that are not diverse. Now, in this day and age, industry is getting rid of DEI, but believe me, they understand they need diverse teams. I think they know that. I mean, could be wrong, but so that's.
No, excellent. Yeah. Yes, Allison.
There was this recent Supreme Court decision that makes it more difficult, I understand, for universities to be race conscious in their admissions process. And so they're allowed to look at a student's life story, but they're more constrained, I understand, in explicitly considering racial diversity in their admissions. And I think I've heard they're already seeing sort of the regression in terms of minority admission to some schools. So I'm curious how you're thinking about that challenge, and based on your experience as a dean and an educator, if you have thoughts about how higher education leaders can respond, and perhaps in engineering in particular.
Again, I'm having trouble. Could you just repeat part of it?
Yes, I'll try to speak up. Now that the Supreme Court has made it more difficult for universities to consider race in their admissions.
Yes.
How do you think leaders in higher education should respond and account for that challenge?
Well, it's difficult. I mentioned this issue of the magazine, The Bridge, National Academy of Engineering magazine, The Bridge. There's an article on the Supreme Court. And the thrust of the article is that you can still do diversity, even with the Supreme Court decisions. And I'm not a lawyer, so I can't, get into all the legal stuff. But the first thing is, don't give up. You don't have to give up on diversity. You may have to find new ways of doing it. And there are ways of doing it. In my experience at Michigan State University, the state passed an anti-affirmative action amendment. State constitution says there should no longer be any DEI. And I was at Michigan State. And at that time, we had fellowships for minority students. Well, we had to rewrite the criteria and take out, the minority students part of it. So we rewrote it. And when I say I mean the graduate school rewrote. And I recommended students to the graduate schools. I was able to recommend many minority students to the graduate schools because I worked at it. I used the new criteria, and I found people who excelled in various aspects of the new criteria and got a lot of minority students awarded fellowships. So what I'm saying is, before, with the set-asides, it was automatic. after the amendment, it took work. If you want to work at it, you can make it work. But if you say, okay, I don't have to do that anymore, then it won't happen. So I think universities can still be diverse, but they'll have to work at it.
And that's my understanding of what's been going on with many universities. I know when I started Rice University in 1963, the first African-American started in the graduate department there and became head of the math department at the University of Maryland. The current president of Rice University is second generation. His family was originally from Haiti, Reg DeRoche, and I know they have gone through a particularly conscious effort to make available to other students by doing this kind of thing, by looking at the qualities that they're looking for, whatever, and really to continue increasing applications. But I do think you're right that organizations and universities are going to have to not stop, but consider how they can be more deliberate in targeting and trying to increase the quality and diversity of their labor force without perhaps using all the language that is now looking like it might be forbidden. But it is a challenge.
There are also arguments for diversity in engineering like this. Perhaps some of you have heard about the tech companies on the West Coast asking for more H-1 visas. H-1 visas are visas for people to come to the United States and do critical things. And the West Coast companies are saying we need more to bring in more people. So we want more visas. However, what about producing those people here? Will the companies work to do that? And if you look at the numbers, the company's saying the United States is not producing enough engineers of the kind we want. And that means engineers of all races, of women engineers. So I think sometimes national need can be used as a justification, not necessarily for diversity, but for numbers. The numbers are just not there. And the only way you're going to get the numbers is by accessing diverse populations. As simple as that.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. Other comments? Yeah, Don, do you want to make a final?
Well, let me just thank you very much, Dr. Pierre, for being with us. And I think we have gotten into areas that are really central, but that have always been central to the success of the country. Its public sector and its private sector. We've also gotten into the discussion of how we can, the beginning of a discussion of how we can respond to the efforts that the new administration is making. And this is exactly what I think all of us need to be thinking about and trying to find ways that we can contribute to the solution to these problems. I really appreciate the lessons from your experience. You've been fighting this a lot longer than those of us that now are thinking, gosh, something as bad has happened. something called DEI is no longer permissible, well, that surely will be eventually dealt with, but it basically, you're telling us, and I think we have to accept this is going to be a continuing struggle. It's not anywhere near over, but it is something that we can all contribute to. And many thanks for that.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
right. It's a challenge, and we're going to have to work at it. I am not totally giving up because you can't afford to. The nation needs, the talents of all of its people. It's a national need, so we've got to work at it.
well, we have to keep in mind the quality and length of your leadership and be so very thankful from someone who wasn't able to get a job as you graduated from college to having been in the forefront of so many higher education universities and efforts. We really, and you've donated your time to us this morning. We can't thank you enough for doing this. We really hope we can stay in touch in one way or the other, and in appreciation for what you've given us this morning.
Okay, well, thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to continue to fulfill those missions that they gave me in high school.
Well, thank you. I have just a couple of comments because it has been a really rough second week. And a couple of things that just to note, that when the executive order came down that directed schools to discriminate against minority transgender students or face legal consequences, the president of the Montgomery County School Board of Education issued a response to that order, saying that representing a school district of 160,000 students, Yang, the president of the school board, affirmed that Montgomery County would continue to recognize gender identity as a protected characteristics, and we stand by our community and school system values, which include learning, relationships, respect, excellence, and equity. They guide us every day and anchor us when navigating difficult times. We intend to use all legal means necessary to uphold them. Next week, our Associate Pastor Denise will be introducing us to a book, A Different Kind of Feast, a book that helps us identify those patterns and habits that distract us from the fullness of life and open up space for the feast that awaits each of us. And I can't think of a more timely need than to be able to begin to explore those avenues. On February 16th, Monique Mo Bryant, who is the faith leader and executive director of Challenging Racism, will be leading us in discussion and looking at how we can counteract racism in the current environment when racism is currently being supported by our elected leaders. There are a number of avenues out there for us to access. I received a very enheartening message from our representative, Jamie Raskin, yesterday through email. I encourage you to keep in touch. He has resources on his website. Chris Van Hollen echoed another very well detailed message about how he is and how the Maryland delegation is working to stand up to these orders. And in the meantime, we have each other in our community. I can't thank you enough for joining us and continue to support each other. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks.